Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered round him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with Jairus, and a large crowd followed Jesus and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him. And they went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. There's just a few words that Jesus uses in this gospel reading which can sum up not only the gospel reading we have today, but in fact the whole 2 chapters of Mark chapter 4 and Mark chapter 5. And really you could say the whole gospel of St. Mark. It's when Jesus says to the leader of the synagogue, it's about 12 lines from the bottom of your gospel reading, "Do not fear, only believe." Do not fear, only believe. And fear is quite often the response of people, not only here in this gospel reading, you see it come up a few times, fear or amazement or confusion or a kind of paralysis. Not only here in this reading, but throughout the gospel, the people, the disciples, all seem to just get fearful, or they don't know what to do, but somehow Jesus' power still goes forward. That seems to be a really strong theme and message of Mark's Gospel. Do not fear, but believe. Only believe. Do not fear, only believe. And somebody, one scholar, writing about these two chapters in Mark's Gospel, could put it nicely. He was saying, these accounts of the walking on the water, of the healing of the demoniac, and these two healings that we have here this morning, Mark's Gospel urges a faith in God, a simple faith in God. Mark's Gospel urges a simple faith in God, a trust that triumphs over natural dangers, demonic powers, disease, and even death. So in these two chapters, St. Mark in his writings urges a simple faith in God, a trust that triumphs over natural dangers, demonic powers, disease, and even death. And all of those things can be terrifying to us, can they not? I mean, you think about things like Charleston, Tunisia, these things we saw last week, this death that Julie's had in her family, these things they make us shake and be full of fear at times, the things that we have to confront. But despite that fear, Jesus says to us, do not fear, only trust. And when, in the context of these two healings, and in my own life, when I think of healing, one of the places that I think of it in particular, as I've mentioned before, is my niece Leanne, who, when she was only 19 years old, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And it was really quite devastating for us. She's this absolutely beautiful little angel of a person, and then to have this diagnosis, which I'm no medical doctor, of course, but I understand when it starts that late onset, that it can become fatal in your 30s. So it's almost like we had a ticking time bomb. And the family, of course, I think we're all pretty much kind of church-going people, prayed for her all the way through these years, and have surrounded her with love, and in some cases really quite sacrificial love. Not only the family, but also her friends and colleagues at work. And then she had the benefit of some, it seemed, very good medical kind of advice and access to some of the drugs that make a difference. And she herself has kept a very positive attitude all the way through, and has worked hard on complying with what the doctors have asked her to do, and not to become too anxious, just as Jesus says here, don't fear, but trust. And to me, now it's 20 years later, over 20 years later, and she's now not dead, but in her early 40s, she's married a wonderful man, and they've adopted 2 children, and she's living a really wonderful life. And I say that because there's something about it which really reflects what Christian healing seems to me to be. What phrase I like to use is a miracle in progress, a miracle that takes time, a miracle that involves everybody getting involved in it, including God, but also those doctors and the family, the medical knowledge, everything coming together. The full engagement. So when we believe, it's not just a religious thing, it's not just a spiritual thing, it's not just something for your prayer time, it becomes, your belief is your whole way of life, your whole way of organizing everything in your life, your physical life, your finances, your everything. It's that full engagement. And I think you see that, a touch of that here in this gospel reading. This beautiful little phrase that the woman uses, says to herself before she goes to Jesus. She says, if I touch him, if I touch his clothing, I will be healed. If I touch his clothing, I will be healed. It's one of the beautiful little phrases in Mark's gospel that makes us think that these are all original accounts, because it keeps on coming up that Mark tells you something that it looks like he's, or whoever told him, maybe St. Peter, was looking at the situation. It's the kind of things you remember. I remember she had a green t-shirt on, that kind of thing that makes Mark's gospel so vital. And here she says to herself, if I touch his garment, I shall be healed. It's really kind of poetic in the Greek, and I'll tell it to you because I've always kept it in my mind as one of those beautiful phrases. So you can practice it yourself if you like. She says, E optimai so thesetai. E optimai so thesetai. The first one is optime, it means touch him, if I touch him. And then the second one, as it's translated here, says, I will be healed. E optimai so thesetai. Because it's a prayer that any of us can offer. If I touch him, I will be healed. If I hold him, if I engage with him, with my whole faith, I will be healed. Not only healed, but that's a beautiful word. There are other words that could have been used if it was only healing she's referring to. So thesetai has a range of meanings. One of them is heal, as is here. Another one is rescue. I could be rescued. And another reading is, if I touch him, I will be saved. So it's referring not only to a cure of her situation, but really to her whole spiritual life, that I will be saved. If I go to Jesus, if I hold on to Jesus, I will be saved. I will be rescued. I will be healed. That's what she says to herself. So it's a beautiful prayer any of us can keep and make our own. E optimai so thesetai. If I touch him, I will be healed. And then, of course, then she is. But there's something which comes out of it because of that third meaning, I will be saved. That's ultimately saved, in a way. Now, all of us have had prayers probably for people that we feel may not have been answered. We've prayed for somebody to survive a certain disease and we feel that they didn't survive it or something like that. It wasn't the answer we kind of wanted. But you have even St. Paul, of course, who prayed a prayer to God for healing, for his own healing. When he was troubled, what he says is a thorn in his side, whatever that is, we don't know what it is, but it might have been some kind of disease, that he had asked God for healing, and the answer from God was, my grace is made perfect in weakness. So for him, the response of God's grace was that God would give him strength to come through what he came through. And ultimately, like St. Peter, he died. He was a martyr there in Rome in about 66 AD. He and Peter, more than likely, were both executed there. So it's not that Christian healing is that we're asking for immortal life, because even the people in the New Testament, all of them in the New Testament, including these two people here, the woman with the hemorrhage and then the little girl, are not still alive today. So even though Jesus healed them, they're not still alive today. So it's not immortality that the healing of Jesus brings, but it is in the resurrection from the dead. That is the hallmark of Christian healing, the resurrection from the dead. We do know healing and cures in our own life. I have known them, you may have known them, and to describe how I would see that Christian healing in the life of Leanne. But it's not always that there is a cure, but God in his wisdom is the one who brings what the nature of that healing is. So the people still have this fear with which they respond. In this week, we have the forward day by day that sums up this gospel reading for today very well. I'll just quote a couple of lines from it. God's work is about bringing wholeness out of brokenness, bringing joy out of sorrow, bringing life out of death. God has promised abundant life to us, even in the midst of death. That life often comes in surprising and creative ways. Let me read it again. God's work is about bringing wholeness out of brokenness, bringing joy out of sorrow, bringing life out of death. God has promised abundant life to us, even in the midst of death. That life often comes in surprising and creative ways. And so when Jesus says to us, do not fear, only believe, as St. Paul, perhaps as he was facing that man with that sword to execute him, do not fear, only believe, because the way God's grace was going to come was not in saving him from being executed, but in God's grace flowing through the martyrdom of St. Paul and St. Peter, that the whole gospel would reach the whole world. So let's not be afraid ourselves. And I should be the last one to say it. And every Sunday morning, let me tell you, another one of my faults, one of my many faults, on Saturday night, whenever it comes to this, I can't sleep properly. I always find it difficult to sleep. And I think, how ridiculous is this, you know? On Sunday morning, I'm going to say, don't fear, only believe. And meanwhile, here, I find it difficult to sleep on Saturday night. But Jesus says to us, don't be anxious. But isn't it true how quickly we get anxious? You know, one minute we're saying, God help me, and the next moment we pick the problem up again, and we're just as anxious as we were 10 minutes before, right? But so this word from Jesus is a difficult one in a way. Do not fear, only believe. It's the call of Jesus to all of us, to live a life that's fully engaged in our faith in him, to trust in him, and let his, right up to our last moment and beyond it, to let God's grace be flowing through us in whatever way, mysterious that is. We don't know the answer to what that prayer will be, but somehow God's grace will come. Do not fear, only believe. In the name of Christ, amen.
Amen.